The secular humanist worldview is molded by its doctrines of atheism, naturalism, and evolution. This can be seen even in their psychology. Humanists embrace third force psychology, which is based almost exclusively on the work of Abraham Maslow, Rollo May, Erich Fromm, and Carl Rogers. Their psychological goal is known as self-actualization. It focuses on man's inherent goodness and predicts that every individual can achieve mental health simply by getting in touch with and actualizing his real self. Secular humanists call for individuals to become self-actualized by meeting all their personal needs. In essence, this psychology teaches individuals to turn to themselves for answers to their problems.
The secular humanists, psychologically speaking, wrap themselves around the concept of self-actualization. In fact, the humanists love the notion of self. The concept of soul and spirit, even character, is sort of gone by the wayside right now. And the emphasis is on the self, and what they want us to believe is that each self can look inside and try to figure out what's really going on, that we can find out the answers to the world and ethical answers and what's right and what's wrong inside of us. Well, the truth is the self by itself can't give us a whole lot. And even the secular humanists write books for the self to read. So we're actually going outside of ourselves to read their materials as well.
Self-actualization calls for the person struggling with self-esteem to abandon all feelings of inferiority and guilt. Humanist psychologists believe that guilt is forced upon individuals by corrupt social institutions and religious beliefs, and Christianity is the chief culprit. Many secular humanists explain away religious belief as either a symptom or a cause of mental illness. They blame many of society's problems on religion rather than the reality of human sin.
Carl Rogers. Though I am very well aware of the incredible amount of destructive, cruel, malevolent behavior in today's world, I do not find that this evil is inherent in human nature. Humanism decrees that human nature is essentially good and all humans, once free from belief in the supernatural, can become self-actualized, perfected world citizens fit for a new world order. Corliss Lamont. Human beings possess the power or potential of solving their own problems through reliance primarily upon reason and scientific method applied with courage and vision. Since secular humanists believe that only the physical world exists, that there is not a spiritual side to humans, they have a monistic view of reality. Psychological monism is the belief that all of reality is one substance, and therefore the mind is reduced to nothing more than the physical brain. Dualism, on the other hand, affirms the existence of both the natural and the spiritual. According to secular humanists, monism is the only rational, scientific way to perceive man and his thoughts.
Secular humanists believe that their worldview will ultimately grant humanity the freedom to perfect itself by taking away the social and ideological shackles binding them to the superstitions of the past. By unlocking all of humanity's abilities, they believe we will finally actualize our full potential and create a heaven on earth.
If God doesn't exist, and humans have simply evolved, then our thoughts must be nothing more than neurons firing in the brain. This is the view of Marxist-Leninist psychology. Marxists base their psychology on the findings of Ivan Pavlov, the famous Russian physiologist who performed experiments with dogs and conditioned behavior. He introduced behaviorism. Behaviorism views people as simply stimulus receptors, capable of responding in only predetermined ways to any given set of circumstances. Humans are understood as being basically good, but they are corrupted by oppressive social institutions. In order to counter the effects of such oppressive social institutions, Marxists use Pavlov's theories on conditioning and behavior to master the means of influencing others.
Once you begin with an atheistic, evolutionistic scheme of things, then your psychology has to follow course. And all they have left is a form of behaviorism, And from their point of view, again, man is an evolving animal. And remember the experiments that were done with the dogs and with Pavlov, and then you have B.F. Skinner and his experiments with chickens and other types of animals. You're just programming man to react to certain stimuli and hope for the best.
In the Marxist view, the human person is essentially material, is essentially a function. The human person, and here I'm using the word it, is a cog in a whole wheel of things that go around. And so the essential function of the human person is how the human person serves this bigger whole.
Marxists believe that ultimately man can be perfected, but only under the proper circumstances. According to Marxist psychology, man is merely an animal who needs chemical fine-tuning before achieving perfection. Lenin, in particular, was willing to experiment with a number of methods to motivate and achieve the perfect society.
The New Age movement is an important force in contemporary American culture. New Agers seek to live out their beliefs in the transformation of themselves and of society. They seek to transform every facet of their individual lives, and one key to that personal transformation resides in the realm of human psychology.
Achieving collective consciousness is the main goal for cosmic humanists. New Age psychology is based on one simple principle: commune with your own divine essence, the God within.
The New Age is so fixated on self-actualization, self-development, and that's how many of the New Age programs are put across. Whether it's yoga, meditation, whatever, it is all for the sake of finding yourself, realizing your higher self, and coming to your full potential as a self, as a person.
The popular New Age guru, Deepak Chopra, proclaims the only clear path to God is a path of constant self-awareness. Deepak even goes so far as to declare, "I believe that God has to be known by looking in the mirror." Shirley MacLaine proclaimed a similar message in her movie Out on a Limb.
I am God. I am God.
I am God.
I am God. I am God.
The New Age movement combines certain schools of psychology with Eastern spirituality. New Agers use the theories of Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers, Carl Jung, and Rollo May to evaluate our view of humanity as having unlimited potential. In contrast to the Christian understanding of humans as sinful, Maslow believed that since our inner nature is good or neutral rather than bad, it is best to bring it out and encourage it rather than to suppress it. If it is permitted to guide our life, we grow healthy, fruitful, and happy. Maslow promoted a psychology of self-actualization. Rogers promoted a psychology of self-realization. Jung advocated collective consciousness. In the end, each person accomplishes the goal of realization by satisfying his or her own needs and desires. This view helped give rise to the human potential movement. This expressed itself in such common slogans as, "I'm okay, you're okay." The focus is upon the self, upon developing our own personal humanity. The human potential movement encourages people to change from older Western ways of thinking into a newer Eastern way of thinking. But New Age psychology focuses on more than just individual development. Their focus is on the collective. The New Age goal is to raise a collective consciousness so that humanity can further its psychological and spiritual evolution. In this way, the well-being of the entire world could be secure and assured. New Agers believe that our thinking creates reality. Mind over matter is a common slogan. Thus, our thinking ultimately determines our failure or success in life. This belief also affects how one understands health and illness in life. People suffering through painful sickness or disease are doing so because they have not yet achieved higher consciousness. We are not really victims of illness or disease, we just think we are. As Shirley MacLaine writes, we are not victims of the world we see, we are victims of the way we see the world. In truth, there are no victims, there is only self-perception and self-realization. To achieve a higher state of consciousness, cosmic humanists use meditation, sometimes aided by crystals or mantras, or even by drugs. In order to commune with the universe and your divine nature, you need to meditate and look within. Many New Agers also believe in an ability to channel spirits. They believe that spirits will sometimes speak through a gifted person in an altered state of consciousness. Channeling has been made popular through a variety of books, as well as through mainstream movies such as Ghost. Many New Agers believe the spirits channeled are those of ascended masters, people who have traveled through the earth plane and achieved a high level of consciousness. They will help us find our way in life, so we too can gain an enlightened consciousness. Not every member of the New Age movement sees much significance in channeling, but all New Agers embrace meditation as an important tool for attaining higher consciousness. This enlightened state of mind can be further enhanced through astrology, yoga, firewalking, Ouija boards, crystals, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, drugs, sex, guided visualization, and other esoteric practices. The Bible statements regarding the body and the soul lead to a view of psychology known as dualism. Dualism is the belief that human nature consists of two fundamental kinds of reality: the body, which is physical or material, and the mind, which is spiritual or immaterial. Humanistic worldviews, however, believe in monism, the belief that the mind and the brain are one and the same. Only the Christian worldview, with its affirmation of psychological dualism, can effectively account for the nature of human behavior.
Dualism is the view that animals and human beings are composed of a body, which is physical, and a soul, which is non-physical. Now, an animal soul is clearly taught in the Bible. Genesis and Revelation teach that animals have souls, but they do not survive the death of their bodies. The animal soul is very different from a human soul. The animal soul does not have moral understanding and other things like that. But animals have consciousness, and the human soul is much more complicated than the animal soul.
The basic issue in psychology today revolves around the concept of soul, spirit, and mind. The atheistic, reductionistic position, by reduction here I mean you reduce the mind to the brain, you reduce the brain to matter, you reduce the matter to chemical elements and so forth, and you determine, the conclusion is man is simply matter in motion. From the Christian perspective, we argue that man is more than matter. Man is also mind. He's soul.
It is the soul that contains an animal or a human's consciousness, its thoughts, feelings, experiences, pains, and so on. And the soul is what makes the body alive.
Biblical Christian psychology addresses the sinful nature of human beings. Understanding this reality is critical for understanding people's nature and mental processes. People's sinful natures and desires to rebel against God are the source of most psychological problems.
If you don't understand that human beings are sinful, you don't understand human beings, and you won't know how to treat them. Any therapeutic method that is built on the inherent goodness of human beings is going to go awry, because you're going to ignore the fact that there's hate in the hearts of human beings.
Unlike humanistic worldviews, which claim that guilt is the byproduct of evil social institutions, the biblical Christian worldview acknowledges the fallen nature of humans and the guilt that results from sinning against God.
If you believe that human beings are basically good and you overlook our fallen nature, then you focus simply on guilt feelings. And so humanistic psychologists, for example, don't try to address real guilt, but rather address guilt feelings. And those guilt feelings come from archaic social institutions like the family or the church, maybe outdated value systems as well. And so they address the feelings of guilt rather than real guilt itself. In contrast to that, the Christian perspective acknowledges the fallen nature of human beings, and we also want to address the feelings of guilt and the real guilt that may be behind those feelings of guilt as well. We recognize that real guilt comes from our failure to love God and love our neighbor. And so, in contrast to a humanistic perspective that says that we need to redefine or repress guilt and guilt feelings, the Christian perspective acknowledges human responsibility, it calls for repentance, and it seeks reconciliation with God and with human beings.
Another difference between Christian and humanistic psychology is in the area of suffering. Whereas humanistic psychologies attempt to alleviate all personal suffering, Christian psychology believes that God can use suffering to bring about positive development in an individual. As William Kilpatrick wrote, the real test of a theory or way of life is not whether it can relieve pain, but what it says about the pain it cannot relieve. And this is where I believe secular psychology lets us down and Christian psychology supports us.
There are things that God has to teach us about Himself and about ourselves that we could not learn any other way than through suffering, and that therefore suffering may well be a part of God's economy for humanity to bring people to a knowledge of Himself.
Christian psychology believes that God can use suffering to bring about positive development in an individual. Finding meaning in suffering is a feature that is unique to Christian psychology.